I had 72 hours to come up with $780, or a guy with a tow truck was going to take my car like it was never mine. The bank didn't call it that. They called it a cure. They called it a recovery. Like they were doing me a favor by putting a boot on the only thing keeping me from sleeping in a ditch. The email had been polite. The voicemail had been colder. The last one said, "Final notice," and gave me a date and a window. I pictured my Civic sitting in some fenced lot with 100 other people's problems, and I kept breathing anyway because there wasn't anything else to do. I'd been living gig to gig for months. Instacart when the orders were good, DoorDash when they weren't, cash tips at a bar on weekends if the manager was in a decent mood. Every day felt like it started behind and ended worse. The kind of tired that didn't go away with sleep, and then you stop getting sleep too. I'd sleep in the driver's seat with my jacket zipped up to my chin, the steering wheel pressing into my ribs, waking up every hour because the cold found a new way in. Cheap food, gas station coffee, dollar menu stuff that sat heavy in my stomach, protein bars that tasted like dust. My hands always smelled faintly like fries, no matter how much sanitizer I used. I kept a gym membership I couldn't afford because the showers were worth more than the money. I'd shower fast, shave when I had to, and stare at my own face like I was trying to recognize the person looking back. Somewhere around day 3 of that final notice countdown, I stopped pretending I was going to talk my way out of it. There wasn't anyone to talk to. A call center doesn't care if you're trying. A form doesn't care if you're tired. They wanted a number. I had a number. It just wasn't theirs. I found the listing in a Starbucks parking lot using their Wi-Fi with my phone on low power mode. I wasn't even being picky anymore. I scrolled past anything that said background check, anything that wanted a resume, anything that made me feel like I had to explain myself. Then I saw it, short and blunt, like somebody wrote it in a rush. Caretaker needed. 72-hour handoff, closed motel. Inspection and paperwork pending. Cash after completion. That last line hit like a hand on my shoulder. Cash after completion. It sounded sketchy and I knew it. It sounded like trouble, but trouble paid, and the clock in my head was already counting down in hours, not days. I clicked the number and called before I could overthink it. A man answered on the second ring. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask who I was. He just listened while I told him my name and asked if the job was still available. There was a pause, like he was checking something that didn't need checking. "Be here by 4, he said, and gave me an address in Flagstaff. No questions, no, "Tell me about yourself." No fake friendliness, just a time and a place. Flagstaff wasn't far if you had a full tank and a clean conscience. I had half a tank and a deadline. I threw my duffel bag in the back seat and started driving before I could change my mind. I 40 through northern Arizona climbs without apologizing. The air dried out as I went up, and the temperature dropped in a way you could feel in your teeth. By the time the signs started saying, Flagstaff, Arizona, my hands were stiff on the wheel. My headlights swept across trunks and branches like I was searching for something, and that made my stomach tighten because I didn't want to be searching for anything. I wanted to show up, do the job, take the money, and keep my car. That was the whole plan. Simple enough to survive. The cold up here wasn't wet like the coast. It was clean and sharp, the kind that made everything feel farther away. The streets looked normal, gas stations, chain restaurants. A few people bundled up, moving fast, faces tucked into their collars. It could have been any mountain town if you didn't know better. The address took me off the main strip and into a quieter stretch where the lights thinned out. I passed a closed diner with chairs stacked in the window, a car lot with frosted windshields lined up like teeth. Then the motel sign showed up ahead, dim and half working, one letter dead so the name looked wrong even from the road. The place sat back from the street behind a parking lot glazed with ice that caught the light in a dull sheen. I pulled in slow, tires crunching over frozen gravel. There were no other cars, no movement behind the curtains, just that sign buzzing faintly and a single light in the lobby glowing like it was trying to convince someone the building still mattered. On the glass door, taped at eye level, was a printed notice in plain black letters. Closed for transfer. Inspection. Pending. I stared at it for a second, like it might change if I stared long enough. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't take it out. I already knew what it was. I exhaled once, grabbed my duffel, and pushed the door open. The lobby smelled like old carpet and cold air that never warmed up. The heater was on somewhere, but it wasn't winning. The front desk was a slab of fake wood with a cheap computer monitor, a bell that looked too clean for the rest of the place, and a stack of forms squared off like somebody had lined them up and walked away. A man stepped out from a back office door behind the desk, like he'd been waiting for the sound of the door chime. Mid-50s, neat hair, clean jacket, not dressed like a motel guy. He had that escrow office posture, shoulders set, eyes already done with you. The kind of person who treated every conversation like paperwork. "You Aiden Crowley?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He looked at his watch without needing to, then looked back at me like he was measuring whether I'd be a problem. "You're on time," he said. "I'm here for the caretaker thing," I said. He didn't smile. He didn't welcome me. He just nodded once like a box got checked somewhere and motioned toward the counter like we were about to sign something that couldn't be unsaid. "Howard Lasky," he said. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't ask how my drive was. He stepped behind the front desk like it belonged to him, even though he wasn't dressed like anyone who'd ever changed a bed in their life. Clean jacket, clean shoes, hair combed like he'd come straight from an office that smelled like toner and burnt coffee. He pulled a manila folder from under the counter and set it down with the care of someone handling evidence. Then he looked at me like he was already tired of me being there. "This place is closed," he said. He said it like it wasn't a statement, it was a boundary. Like the building itself had been told to stop breathing, and his job was to make sure it stayed that way. He flipped the folder open and slid a single sheet across the counter. It wasn't an application. It wasn't a contract with fine print. It was a simple page with a header, a few bullet points, and a signature line at the bottom. Everything was clean and squared off. No logos, no friendly language, just instructions and consequences implied by the tone. He pointed at the top line with a capped pen. Caretaker. 72-hour handoff, property transfer pending. Those words again, like the listing had been copy-pasted into something more official, or something pretending to be official. I kept my hands on my duffel strap. My shoulders were tense in that way they get when you're trying not to look desperate, even though you know you are. He watched me for a beat, then moved his finger down the page. 3 days. You stay on site, he said. He tapped the paper twice, hard enough to make it thump against the fake wood counter. You follow the schedule on that page, every time, he said. There it was, the part I didn't like. The schedule. He said it like it mattered more than anything else on the sheet. Like, if I did everything right except one time slot, it wouldn't count. I leaned forward just enough to read without making it obvious I was hungry for details. The page was titled Rules and Schedule. Plain font, no flourish. Under it, a short list with times bolded, each one spelled out like it had been argued over in a meeting somewhere. Rule 1. At 11 a.m., check the seal on room 5. You get 30 seconds. Make sure the 2 X marks match the reference photos. Rule 2. At 3:15 p.m., enter room 5. Change the bed sheets and wipe the desk surface. You get 8 minutes. Don't look directly at the rocking chair. If you hear it, say, "I'm just cleaning," and keep working. If the room goes silent, leave immediately. Rule 3. At 2:05 a.m., turn on the lobby television to static. Set the volume to 12. Leave it on for 7 minutes, then turn it off. Don't go over 7 minutes. Rule 4. After midnight, don't sit in any chair anywhere on the property. Rule 5. If anyone shows up and claims they have a reservation, you tell them the property is closed and you don't let them inside. It read like safety policy, like something you'd see taped up in a warehouse break room. Except this wasn't forklifts and wet floors. This was a closed motel with no cars in the lot and a man in clean shoes telling me not to sit down. He must have seen my face change because he sighed, small and controlled, like he was doing me a favor by explaining. He reached back into the folder and pulled out 2 grainy photos printed on regular paper, close-ups of a strip of tan packing tape across a motel door frame, 2 black X marks drawn on it with a thick marker. One photo had a date in the corner and a timestamp, like someone wanted proof. He set them beside the rule sheet and kept talking in that same even tone. He didn't say anything about ghosts. He didn't say anything about old tragedies or local rumors. He used words like liability and condition and chain of custody. He made it sound like the motel wasn't haunted. It was in escrow. He pointed at the line about room 5 again, then at the signature line. I could have asked for more paperwork. I could have asked for a company name. I could have asked why a closed property needed a schedule down to the minute. But the truth was, my car didn't care why. My deadline didn't care why. $780 didn't care why. He looked up. No visitors, no exceptions, he said. The way he said it made my skin tighten, like he was less worried about me getting robbed and more worried about me opening the door for the wrong reason. A moment later, he added the part he knew I cared about. Cash when it's done, he said. He didn't say how much out loud, but he slid another paper from the folder, a simple pay acknowledgement, and I saw the number printed in the middle, big enough to make my stomach drop with relief, big enough to make me feel stupid for not walking out. I swallowed and nodded. My mouth was dry. He watched me read the number, watched me do the math in my head, watched me lose the last bit of caution I'd tried to hold on to. He slid the pen toward me, like he'd already decided. I signed. The ink looked too dark on the white paper. My name felt heavier than usual, like I'd written it somewhere permanent. He took the sheet back, checked the signature, and tucked it into the folder like it was a receipt. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make it land. Don't get creative, he told me. He moved around the desk and opened a drawer. Inside were keys on tagged rings, a logbook with a worn spine, and a cheap digital thermometer still in its plastic packaging. He set the logbook on the counter and flipped it open to the first page. Blank lines, columns for time, temperature, doors checked, notes. He handed me a key ring with 2 keys and a plastic fob that said Lobby and Utility in faded label tape. He didn't hand me anything labeled Room 5. He closed the drawer and clicked it shut. At the back of the lobby, a side door opened and a woman stepped out carrying a small trash bag and a spray bottle. Dark hair pulled back, sweatshirt under a jacket, work pants that had seen 1,000 kneeling scrubs. She stopped when she saw me, and her eyes went straight to the rule sheet like she knew what it was without reading it. She didn't look at Howard for permission. She looked at me like she was trying to decide whether to waste breath. Then she nodded once and said it anyway. Just do the rules, she said. Howard didn't react. He didn't thank her. He didn't warn her off. He just gathered his folder, slid it under his arm, and walked toward the lobby doors. He paused with his hand on the handle, not looking back. The cold outside pressed against the glass like it wanted in. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say good luck. He just left me there with a closed motel, a logbook, and a schedule that treated a rocking chair like it was a loaded weapon. Howard's taillights disappeared down the road, and the motel felt like it exhaled after holding its breath too long. I stood there for a second with my duffel still on my shoulder, listening. Not for anything specific, just listening the way you do when you're alone in a place that's technically safe but doesn't feel like it. The lobby lights were on, but they weren't bright. They made everything look tired. The carpet had that old motel pattern meant to hide stains, and it still looked like it was made of stains. The air carried a faint chemical smell, not fresh cleaner, more like the ghost of cleaner that had soaked into fabric years ago and never left. I set my duffel behind the front desk and opened it just enough to check what I had. Charger, toothbrush, hoodie that smelled like my car, a pair of socks. Not much. I didn't unpack like I was moving in. I unpacked like I was camping somewhere I didn't want to admit was temporary. First thing I did was check the doors. The front lobby door locked with a deadbolt and a flimsy latch that looked like it could be snapped with a hard shoulder. I tested it twice anyway, pushing and pulling until the glass shivered in its frame. There was a side door near the vending machines marked Staff Only. That one had a metal push bar and a lock that clicked with a heavy sound I didn't like. Heavy locks always made me think of what they were meant to keep out. I found the utility door Howard had mentioned. It opened into a short hallway that smelled like bleach and damp towels. The laundry room was back there, empty now, lights off, machines silent. Carts lined up against the wall like they'd been parked carefully and forgotten. I checked the rear exit. Same push bar, same heavy click. The parking lot behind the building was dark and empty, snow crusted along the curb, and the wind coming off the trees made a low shushing sound that felt too close to whispering. Then I came back to the front desk and looked at what he'd left me. The logbook sat open where he'd put it, blank lines waiting. The thermometer was beside it like an insult, still in its plastic. I tore it open with my fingernail and set it on the counter, then wrote my first entry because doing something normal kept my brain from inventing things. Time, temperature, doors checked. My handwriting looked shaky. I didn't like that either. There were cameras, but not the kind you see in a nice place. One small screen mounted high near the desk showed 4 grainy angles: front door, parking lot, hallway, back exit, no sound, just black and white images that made everything look worse than it was. I watched the hallway feed longer than I meant to. It was empty. Nothing moved. The carpet looked like a river of gray in the camera's bad contrast. The heater kicked on with a dry rattle, then pushed warm air through vents that sounded like they had dust in their lungs. The lobby warmed by a degree or two, not enough to be comfortable, enough to make me stop shaking. Wind pressed against the front door hard enough that the glass flexed. The dying sign out front buzzed and skipped. Somewhere in the building, wood popped once, sharp and quick like a knuckle cracking. I told myself it was temperature. Old buildings made noise, pipes talked, frames shifted. That was normal. Then I heard a softer sound under it all. Not a bang, not a knock, not a footstep. A long, slow creak, like weight rocking on wood. I turned my head without meaning to, staring down the guest hallway even though I knew I couldn't see much from where I stood. The sound didn't get louder. It didn't stop. It just existed, distant and steady, like part of the building's breathing. It came again after a pause, another drawn-out wooden complaint, then nothing for a while. I stayed behind the desk and forced myself to do practical things. I checked the doors again. I scanned the cameras. I drank water from the sink because I didn't have money to waste on vending machine soda. I ate a stale granola bar and tried not to think about how quiet everything was between those creaks. Around midnight, my body started making demands. My knees ached. My lower back felt like it had a knot in it. My eyes burned like sand was under the lids. The lobby chairs looked softer every time I glanced at them. The couch looked like a bed. Even the torn desk chair felt like mercy. After midnight, don't sit. That line sat in my head like it had been branded there. It didn't matter if I was behind the desk or out by the window. It didn't matter if it was a couch instead of a chair. It didn't matter if I told myself I was only resting for a minute. Don't sit. I checked my phone. 12:18 a.m. Still no service. Time was still moving at least. I didn't sit. I slid down the wall behind the desk where nobody could see me on the cameras and folded myself onto the floor. It was cold through my jeans. I leaned my head back against the drywall and closed my eyes for just a second, the way you do when you're trying to steal a minute from your own life. The building creaked again, closer this time, and my eyes snapped open. I didn't get up. I didn't go looking. I just listened, breathing shallow, like I was trying not to make enough sound to be noticed. Eventually, the sound faded. The heater cycled off. The lobby got colder. I kept telling myself it was wind and settling and bad sleep. I kept trying to explain it away because explaining is what you do when you don't have control. Time crawled toward 2. When my phone clock hit 2:04, I got up off the floor slowly, joints cracking, and went to the old television mounted in the corner like it had been bolted there decades ago and never moved again. The remote sat on the shelf underneath, taped together at the back. 2:05 a.m. static for 7 minutes. That was the line I couldn't mess up. I held the remote in my palm and waited for the minute to flip. My phone ticked over to 2:05 a.m. "Okay," I said. I clicked the TV on. The screen blinked to life, a dull blue glow, then jumped to static. White noise and black speckle. The kind that makes your eyes hurt if you stare too long. I set the volume to 12 like the page said. The hiss filled the lobby, not loud enough to wake neighbors, loud enough to feel like it was coating the room. 7 minutes, I muttered, and it worked. The moment the static started, that faint creak I'd been hearing all night died like someone had cut a line. Not faded, not drifted away, just gone. The lobby felt flatter without it, like the room lost depth. Even the heater sounded different, more mechanical, less like breath. I stood there watching the seconds tick on my phone, forcing myself not to touch the volume, not to change the channel, not to do anything that could be called creative. At 2:12 a.m., I turned the TV off. The blue glow vanished. The lobby went back to its dim, tired light. The static was gone. For a few heartbeats there was nothing, just the wind outside and the dry click of the heater. Then, from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard it again. A creak. Softer than before. Cleaner. Like it wasn't fighting the floor anymore. And it felt closer, not in my ears exactly, but in that place behind your ribs where your body decides whether you're safe. I stayed behind the desk with my hands on the counter, staring down the empty hallway, listening to that slow wooden complaint, and realizing I still had 2 nights left. Morning came in thin and colorless, like the sun didn't feel like doing the work. I didn't sleep. Not really. I dozed in short, ugly bursts on the floor behind the desk, waking up with my cheek pressed to cold tile and my neck locked from the angle. Every time I started to drift, the building would settle or the wind would shove the sign outside into another buzz, and my eyes would pop open like I'd been caught. By the time my phone said 9:40 a.m., my body felt heavy in the wrong places, sand behind my eyes, a sour taste in my mouth from stale granola bars and anxiety. I washed my face in the lobby bathroom sink, the water coming out colder than it should have been, and tried to make myself look like someone who belonged in daylight. The motel looked worse in the morning. The lobby lights were still on, and now you could see how they lit up every scratch in the fake wood counter, every scuff mark in the carpet. The brochures on the rack were sun-faded and curled at the corners. The coffee station was empty except for a dusty plastic tray that probably hadn't held fresh cups in months. Outside, the parking lot had a skin of ice that hadn't melted. The pine trees behind the back fence stood perfectly still. No birds, no traffic noise. Just the quiet you get at elevation when the air's too cold to carry sound. I kept checking my phone like it might suddenly get bars and tell me I'd imagined the whole night. Nothing. No service. No messages. Time still moved. That was all I got. At 10:58 a.m., I walked down the guest hallway with the rule page in my mind like a list I couldn't forget even if I wanted to. Room numbers ran in neat order on brass plates. The carpet was faded and slightly damp at the edges where it met the wall, like it had been cleaned too many times with not enough drying. My footsteps sounded loud in the empty corridor. The air felt cooler the farther I went, not in a dramatic way, just enough that I noticed the change on my cheeks. Room 5 was on the left, halfway down, same door as the others except for the strip of tan packing tape stretched across the frame. 2 thick X marks were drawn on it in black marker, one on the tape, one half on the tape and half in the painted wood so you'd know if it shifted. It looked simple, almost childish, until you thought about why someone would bother. My phone ticked over to 11 a.m. I leaned in close. The marker lines matched. The tape hadn't wrinkled, no tears, no peel, no fingerprints. The doorknob was right there. Brass, dulled by years, the kind that held onto every touch. I didn't need to touch it for the rule. It didn't say to test the handle. It didn't say to open the door. But my hand hovered anyway, because my brain kept trying to turn this into something I could solve. When I finally let my fingers brush the knob, the cold bit straight through my skin. Not the normal cold of metal in winter. This was deeper, like the cold had weight. Like the door had been holding it in all night and didn't want to share it. I snatched my hand back fast enough to make myself feel stupid. I stared at the tape again, like the X marks would tell me why that knob felt like it belonged outside. 30 seconds. That was all. I backed up, checked my phone, and headed back to the lobby without looking over my shoulder. The rest of the day moved in small chores. I wrote in the logbook, doors checked, temperature, notes, nothing unusual, even though everything felt unusual. I walked the perimeter outside once with my hoodie pulled tight, boots slipping on ice. There were no footprints in the snow crust along the fence, no tire tracks, no sign anyone had been there overnight but me. I found the linen closet in the utility hall. It was half-stocked, clean sheets folded in stacks that smelled like industrial detergent, and something else underneath, something like old cotton that never fully dries. I grabbed a set, a towel, a spray bottle of cleaner, and a rag. I set them on the counter behind the desk and stared at my phone until it hit 3:10 p.m. Rule 2 had a timer. 8 minutes. That wasn't enough time to do a good job if you were being careful. It was enough time to do the job and leave like the room was on fire. At 3:13, I found the little timer app on my phone and set it for 8 minutes. I put the phone in my pocket with the screen facing out so I could see the clock without pulling it all the way out. At 3:14, I stood at the start of the hallway and made myself breathe slow. In through my nose, out through my mouth. My hands were already sweating in the cold. At 3:15 p.m., I started walking. 3:15, I muttered. I kept my eyes forward, not on the doors, not on the peepholes, not on the dark line where the carpet met the wall. I didn't want my brain picking up details it could turn into shapes. Room 5 looked the same as it had at 11 o'clock. Tape intact. X marks clean. The marker line that crossed from tape to paint still lined up perfectly. I peeled the tape the way you peel a bandage, slow and careful, trying not to tear anything. The adhesive made a soft ripping sound that felt too loud in the hallway. Under it, the door was just a door. No extra lock, no chain, no warning sign, nothing that screamed danger. I unlocked it with the key Howard had left, the one that opened the guest rooms, even though they were supposedly closed. The latch clicked and the door swung inward with a reluctant scrape. Cold air spilled out immediately, not a draft, not wind, just cold, like the room had been storing it. I stepped inside, keeping my gaze low like I was trying not to offend the space. The light came on with a weak yellow buzz that made everything look sick. The curtains were thick and heavy, pulled shut, their fabric dusty and stiff like it hadn't moved in a long time. The carpet was worn down in a path from the door to the bed, like feet had paced the same line over and over. The room smelled wrong. Damp, cold wood, like a shed after rain. Fabric dust. A faint sourness under it, something human that had soaked in and never washed out. The kind of smell that tells you a room has been lived in too hard. The bed was made, but sloppy, like someone had done it in a hurry. The sheets were clean enough, but the corners weren't tucked the way a housekeeper would tuck them. The comforter sat crooked. I didn't ask myself why. I didn't have time to start asking why. The desk was along the wall, cheap laminate, a lamp with a stained shade, and a Bible drawer that didn't sit flush. The chair at the desk was a normal motel chair, 4 legs, no wheels, and in the far corner, angled toward the bed like it had an opinion, was the rocking chair. Old wood. Not antique pretty. Just old. The armrests were worn down to a smooth shine where hands had gripped them over and over. The seat had a faint dip in the center like it remembered a body. The runners at the bottom were scarred with drag marks, not just from rocking, from being pulled across the carpet in short, stubborn scrapes. I didn't look at it directly. I let my eyes register it the way you register a knife on a counter without staring at the blade. I set the clean sheets on the foot of the bed and pulled the old ones off in one practiced motion, like I'd done this job before, like I belonged here. I bundled them tight so they wouldn't brush my legs. The fabric felt colder than it should have, cold enough to raise bumps on my arms. I laid the fresh-fitted sheet down and snapped it at the corners, eyes locked on my hands, on the elastic, on the mattress seam. I moved fast, but not sloppy. I didn't want to be in this room longer than the rule allowed, and I didn't want to make extra noise. The rocking chair creaked once, long and slow, like a person shifting weight. My hands froze for a half second, sheet stretched taut between my fingers. I didn't look up. "I'm just cleaning," I said. I forced my fingers to keep moving. Fitted sheet, flat sheet, pull it tight, smooth it down. The chair creaked again, softer, almost like it was testing whether the first one had worked. I ignored it and moved to the pillowcases, swapping them fast, keeping my eyes on the fabric, on the seams, on the edge of the bed. Then came the rustle. Not the chair creaking. Something like cloth sliding against cloth, like someone adjusted a coat, like someone sat down and the fabric of their jeans brushed the wood. My stomach tightened hard. Every part of me wanted to turn, just a glance, just enough to confirm there wasn't a person in that chair, just enough to get my brain to shut up. I kept my gaze down and finished pulling the comforter straight, hands moving in a smooth, almost angry line. The rustle happened again, closer this time, paired with the tiniest wooden shift. Not a full creak. More like the start of one, the way a chair sounds when it's about to rock. I moved to the desk and sprayed cleaner onto the rag without looking at the mirror above the dresser, without letting my eyes drift into the corner. I wiped the desk in tight strokes, fast and thorough, like I was scrubbing away the thought of that chair more than any dust. The chair creaked a third time, and this one sounded pleased. That's the only way I can describe it. It sounded like it had gotten what it wanted, even though I hadn't given it anything. I felt my neck muscles try to pull my head around. "Nope," I said quietly. I kept wiping. I kept my breathing even. I kept my eyes on the desk edge, the rag, the lamp base. The room's cold pressed in on me, but it wasn't just temperature. It felt like a tension, like the space itself was leaning forward, waiting for me to break. My phone timer buzzed in my pocket. A short vibration that felt loud. I didn't pull it out. I didn't need to. I stepped backward toward the door, still not looking at the corner, still not giving it the satisfaction. And then the room went quiet in a way that made my skin prickle. The heater noise I hadn't noticed stopped. The faint hiss of air through the vent cut off like a switch flipped. Even the outside wind seemed to vanish, like somebody put their hands over my ears. For one beat, it felt like the whole motel was holding still. That silence was worse than the creaking. The creaking was something you could tell yourself was wood and weight and age. Silence like that felt intentional. I didn't finish anything else. I didn't double-check the desk. I didn't smooth the bed again. I stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me, hard. The latch clicked and I twisted the knob to make sure it caught. My lungs finally remembered they were supposed to work. I breathed in cold hallway air like it was fresh. My hands were shaking when I retaped the doorframe. I pressed the packing tape down across the same spot and drew 2 X marks to match the old ones, forcing the marker tip to follow the line like it mattered. It mattered. I backed away and stared at the door, waiting for a creak, for a rustle, for anything that would prove I hadn't imagined it. Nothing. Just an ordinary closed door with fresh tape. I walked back to the lobby too fast, my boots scuffing the carpet, and when I reached the desk, I set the dirty sheets down like they were evidence. I was writing in the logbook when I heard the utility door open. I didn't turn right away. I didn't want another surprise. Rena stepped into the lobby carrying a small trash bag and a spray bottle, like she'd been doing this long enough that fear didn't get to rearrange her schedule. She stopped when she saw me, and her eyes flicked to the logbook, then to my hands. "You went in?" she asked. "I had to," I said. She stared at me for a second, and I couldn't tell if she was mad at me or mad for me. "Don't look at it," she said. She didn't wait for a response. She just walked past the desk toward the back hall like she didn't want to be in the same air as that room any longer than necessary. I stood there in the lobby, pen hovering over the page, trying to steady my breathing and trying not to think about what would happen the next time the chair decided to test me. The rest of the afternoon blurred into paperwork and chores that didn't matter. I logged the seal check at 11 a.m., then the 3:15 p.m. task, and kept my notes short. I wrote down the temperature like the number had meaning. I carried the bag of dirty sheets to the laundry room and left it on top of an empty cart because I didn't have a washer key and I wasn't going to start improvising with locked doors in this place. Outside, the light faded early. It always does up here in winter. The cold came back in layers, settling into the parking lot ice, into the glass, into the lobby walls. The heater worked harder and still didn't win. By 8 p.m., my body felt like it had been wrung out. Not the good kind of tired where you've earned rest, the ugly kind where your muscles ache from being clenched all day and your brain keeps replaying a sound you don't want to remember. I tried to make myself eat. One more granola bar, a bottle of water. My mouth didn't want any of it. Food felt pointless when I couldn't relax enough to swallow. I caught myself staring toward the hallway, listening for the chair, waiting for it like you wait for thunder after lightning. The motel wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't slam doors or flicker lights. It just existed around me with that low-level pressure, like the building had an opinion about how long I'd last. The creak came in the early evening, faint and distant, a long wooden complaint that drifted down the hall and died out before I could decide if it was real. I told myself it was the pipes, or the frame shifting, or a vent damper moving in the wind. Then it came again, and this time, it didn't sound like it was coming from down the hallway. It sounded like it was somewhere above the lobby ceiling, a slow, drawn-out groan, like wood bending under weight. I stared up at the acoustic tiles over the front desk. They sat there in their grid, dusty and still. Nothing moved. No shadow crossed them. The sound faded anyway, leaving my shoulders tight. I walked the lobby perimeter again just to feel like I was doing something. Front door locked, side door locked, utility door locked, rear exit locked. I checked the camera feeds. Parking lot empty, hallway empty, back exit empty. No movement anywhere, and still I felt watched. Around 11:30 p.m., my lower back started to throb in a way that made my vision pulse. It wasn't sharp pain. It was the kind you get after sleeping wrong, after sitting wrong, after being tense too long. It made me want to fold in half and disappear. The lobby chair by the window looked like an answer. It wasn't even a comfortable chair. The fabric was worn and the armrests were flattened from years of use, but it was a chair, and my body wanted the simple relief of taking weight off my legs. Rule 4 didn't care. After midnight, don't sit in any chair anywhere on the property. It was still before midnight. I knew that. My phone said 11:47 p.m. I could have technically sat for 13 minutes and still followed the words. But the way Howard had spoken about the schedule, the way Rena had looked at me, the way the chair had creaked like it was listening, all of it told me the rules weren't about technicalities. They were about intent. This place didn't strike me as something you could outsmart. I paced behind the desk instead, rolling my shoulders, trying to loosen the knot in my back. I drank more water. I pressed my hands to the counter and leaned forward, letting my spine stretch without turning it into a sitting posture. The creak came again, and this time it sounded like it was right behind the wall. Not the guest hallway wall. The wall behind the front desk, the one that backed up to the utility hall. I turned slowly and looked at the drywall like looking would help. The sound didn't repeat. It just lingered in my head as if it had. The heater clicked off. The lobby got colder. My skin prickled with the temperature drop. I rubbed my hands together hard enough to make them sting. Midnight passed without a sound from outside. No cars, no footsteps, no knock on the door. Nothing that would prove the world beyond the lobby was still moving. I checked my phone at 12:19 a.m. out of habit and felt my stomach drop at the number. It was too close to a pattern I didn't want. I told myself it was just a time. A time was a time. Then the TV screen flickered. It was off, black glass reflecting the lobby light, but the screen brightened for half a second like it had received a signal. Not enough to fully turn on, just enough to make the static pattern ghost across it. I hadn't touched the remote. The remote was still on the shelf under the TV where I'd left it. The screen went black again. The creak came immediately after, soft and close, like a response. I felt my mouth go dry. I walked to the TV and stood there with my hands at my sides, forcing myself not to reach for the remote early. It wasn't 2:05 a.m. yet. It wasn't time. The schedule mattered. Every time. The chair made a sound again, and I couldn't pin down where it was coming from. It was like the noise was inside the walls, inside the vents, inside the space between the lobby ceiling tiles. The duct above the breakfast nook rattled once, a piece of metal flexing with the heater cycle. Normal. I told myself it was normal. Then, right beneath that normal sound, I heard the unmistakable scrape of wood on carpet. A short pull. A stop. Like someone dragged a chair a few inches and let it settle. My eyes went straight to the lobby chairs. None of them moved. None of them had room to be dragged without me seeing it. I backed away from the duct like it could bite me. Hours passed in short bursts of time I couldn't account for. My brain would drift for a second and then snap back like it had been slapped. The camera feed stayed empty. The doors stayed shut. The cold pressed in, and my body kept asking for the one thing I couldn't give it. A chair. Around 1:40 a.m., my back pain turned into dizziness. I leaned on the counter to steady myself. The floor felt slightly tilted, like my balance was off. My eyes watered for no reason. My hands trembled when I tried to write another log entry. I looked at the lobby chair again, the one by the window. Just sitting down for 5 seconds wouldn't matter, I told myself, and then immediately hated the thought because it sounded like bargaining. That's what people did when they were about to break a rule. They bargained with themselves, they found a loophole, they made a deal. The chair creaked once, slow and patient, like it was waiting for my decision. "Come on," I muttered. I didn't know who I was talking to, my own body, the building, the stupid idea that I could muscle through this on willpower alone. My knees buckled slightly as I shifted my weight. For a second, I was inches from dropping into that lobby chair, not fully sitting, just perching, just taking the edge off. I felt my hips start to fold, and then I heard it. A creak right by my ear, not distant, not through a vent, not down the hallway, right there, close enough that my skin jumped. I straightened so fast, pain shot through my spine. My heart slammed once, hard, like it was trying to escape my chest. I stood there breathing through my nose, staring at the empty chair, and feeling ridiculous for being scared of furniture. But the fear didn't feel ridiculous. It felt practical. I backed away until my calves hit the wall behind the desk. Then, I slid down into a crouch on the floor, careful with my posture, careful not to let my body settle into anything that looked like waiting. The cold soaked into my legs, my back screamed. I stayed there and watched the camera feeds, forcing myself to blink slow. By 2:03 a.m., my whole body was buzzing with exhaustion. Not sleepy, just ruined. The kind of tired that makes you nauseous. I got up before my legs fell asleep. I walked to the TV again and checked the time on my phone. 2:04 a.m. I held the remote like it was a detonator. When the minute flipped, I didn't hesitate. 7 minutes, I said. 2:05 a.m. I turned on the TV. The screen flashed and filled with static black and white snow hissing through the lobby like it was pouring out of the speakers. Volume 12. Same as last night. The instant the static started, the creaking stopped. Again, not fading, not drifting, just gone. But the silence this time felt different, not empty. Listening. The static didn't just cover the room, it felt like it reached into it, like the noise had weight and was pressing on everything, pinning it down. My ears adjusted, and beneath the hiss, I thought I heard something else. Not words, not a voice, more like a shape of sound, a rhythm inside the noise that matched the creak I'd been hearing all night, like the static wasn't drowning it out, like it was talking back. I kept my eyes on my phone clock. I didn't touch the volume. I didn't change a thing. I stood in the lobby with my jaw clenched and counted seconds like they were money. At 2:12 a.m., I turned the TV off. The static cut out. The lobby returned to its usual quiet. For a moment, I felt relief. Real relief, the kind that makes your shoulders drop. Then I looked down at the carpet near the base of the TV stand and saw something that hadn't been there before. A small fleck of wood. It was pale and dry, the size of a sunflower seed, sitting on the dark carpet like it had fallen from something scraped too hard. I crouched slowly, keeping my weight in my feet, and picked it up with 2 fingers. The edges were rough, splintered fresh. It wasn't dust. It wasn't old debris worked loose by footsteps. It was new. I turned it between my fingers and felt the grain. My eyes flicked toward the hallway without meaning to, toward the direction of room 5. The motel stayed still. The camera feed stayed empty. The doors stayed locked. But the wood in my hand was proof that something inside this building was moving anyway. I didn't throw it away. I didn't know why. I set it in the logbook between the pages like a bookmark, then pressed the book shut like I could keep it from disappearing. I stayed on my feet the rest of the night, back aching, eyes burning, refusing to sit because I was starting to understand something I didn't want to name. The rules weren't for my comfort. They were for my position. By morning, my legs felt like they'd been filled with sand. I'd stayed upright until my vision started to blur at the edges, and then I'd done what I could without breaking the rule. I'd lowered myself to the floor behind the desk, back against the wall, knees bent, feet planted, careful not to let my body fold into anything that looked like resting in a chair. Sleep came in ugly flickers. I'd wake with my jaw clenched, tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, heart already racing like I'd been running. The heater ran in short bursts. The building never warmed. It just stopped being actively painful for a few minutes at a time. Outside the lobby windows, daylight showed Flagstaff for what it was, clean cold air and pine silhouettes, and a parking lot that still held its ice like it didn't plan to let go. I made myself drink water. I washed my face again. I tried to get my hands to stop shaking. It didn't work. The wood fleck from the night before was still in the logbook where I'd left it. I didn't know what I expected to see. Maybe it would be gone, like the motel could erase evidence when it felt like it. It sat there anyway, pale and rough against the paper, and that made it worse in a different way. It meant it wasn't imaginary. At 11 a.m., I walked the hallway again. The guest wing felt colder than the lobby, and the air had that quiet weight to it, like sound didn't want to travel. My footsteps were a dull thud in the worn carpet. I kept my eyes on the floor ahead of me, not because I was scared of jump scares, but because I didn't trust my own peripheral vision anymore. Room 5 waited in the same spot. The tape was still there across the frame. The 2 X marks were still there too, but the line wasn't clean anymore. The marker looked smeared at one edge, like a thumb had dragged through it. The X that crossed from tape to paint didn't line up perfectly now. It was off just enough that you could tell it had moved, even if you weren't trying. My stomach went hollow. I leaned in closer and the smell hit me faintly, like cold, wet wood seeping through the crack around the door. Not strong, just a reminder. I checked my phone to make sure I wasn't seeing things. The time was right. My eyes weren't that tired yet. I stared at the seal for a few seconds too long, hoping it would settle back into place if I watched it. It didn't. I turned around and walked back to the lobby with my shoulders tight and my hands cold, even inside my hoodie pockets. Raina was there when I got back. She stood by the coffee station with a trash bag in one hand, like she'd been waiting for me to finish the check. Her hair was pulled back tight, and there were dark circles under her eyes, like she didn't sleep much either. She glanced at my face, then at the logbook on the counter, like she already knew what I was going to say. "It moved," I said. Her mouth tightened, just a small change, like she was trying not to show any reaction at all. "Don't," she said. It wasn't a full sentence. It didn't need to be. It carried everything in it. "Don't go in. Don't pretend this is normal. Don't give it what it wants." I swallowed. My throat felt raw. "I don't have a choice," I told her. I didn't say why. I didn't have to. The whole point of a deadline is that it doesn't care what you want. She stared at me for a beat, then nodded once, sharp and tired. "Then don't stay long," she said. She stepped closer and lowered her voice without turning it into something dramatic. She didn't explain what long meant. She didn't warn me about ghosts or tell me a story about the last caretaker. She just looked at me like someone who'd watched a person walk into bad weather because they had to, and the only help she could offer was telling them to keep moving. I set up like it mattered. Gloves first. Cheap nitrile gloves from a box I found under the counter, probably meant for cleaning bathrooms. They snapped tight around my wrists, and the plastic smell was sharp for a second, then gone. I grabbed the clean sheets and the towel and the spray bottle. I didn't bring anything else. No phone in my hand, no flashlight, nothing I could fumble with. My phone stayed in my pocket with the timer ready. 8 minutes. That part of the schedule didn't change just because the seal did. I went to the hallway early and stood there until my phone hit the time. At 3:15 p.m., I started walking. The carpet in the guest wing looked darker today. Same carpet, same pattern, but the light felt weaker, like the hallway bulbs were losing power one filament at a time. I heard the heater kick on in the lobby behind me, then fade as I moved deeper down the hall. The air got colder by degrees. Room 5 looked wrong before I even touched it. The tape was still across the frame, but it didn't sit as flat as it had yesterday. It had a slight wrinkle near the corner, like it had been pulled and pressed back down. The marker X marks were smudged in 2 places, and my brain kept trying to see fingertips in the smears. I peeled the tape carefully. The adhesive made that same soft ripping sound, and today it felt like the hallway swallowed it. No echo, no bounce, just a dead sound that vanished. The doorknob was colder than yesterday. I knew it would be. I still flinched when my gloved fingers touched it, the cold pushing through the thin plastic like it wasn't there. I unlocked the door and eased it open. The air that came out wasn't just cold, it was damp. It carried that wet wood smell stronger now, mixed with fabric dust and a faint sour note that reminded me of breath in a closed room. The light inside buzzed on, dirty yellow again, and for a second, I thought it looked dimmer than it had the day before. The bed was made, not the way I'd left it. The comforter was straight, squared off at the foot like someone had taken the time to align it. The pillows sat higher, fluffed in a way that didn't match my hurried hands. The fitted sheet corners were tighter, and there were creases on the top sheet that looked like a body had been under it. Not a full impression, just those shallow angled lines you get when someone shifts in their sleep and the fabric pulls and settles. My skin prickled. I kept my eyes down, but the room forced details into me anyway. The carpet path looked slightly darker near the bed, like it had been pressed by feet. The desk surface looked cleaner than the rest of the room, like something had been wiped there recently. The air felt thicker, colder, as if the room was holding it close. Then I registered the corner. The rocking chair was not where it had been. Yesterday it had been angled toward the bed, tucked back just enough that you could pretend it was decoration. Now it sat a little farther forward, like it had crept out of the corner on its own, and it was turned more directly toward the center of the room. I didn't look at it straight on. I saw it the way you see a shadow without staring at the thing casting it. I moved to the bed and started the job, hands working faster than yesterday. Strip the top layer, replace, smooth, keep moving. The chair creaked once, and this time it sounded closer than it should have been. Not because it was loud, because the sound felt like it was inside the room with me, not down the hall, not behind a wall. I didn't pause. "I'm just cleaning," I said. I snapped the fitted sheet tight and moved to the pillowcases. My fingers didn't feel like my fingers anymore. They felt like tools. Behind me, the curtains trembled. Not the heavy sway you'd get from a draft. A light, quick vibration like someone had brushed the fabric from the other side. The window was shut. I knew it was shut. I'd been in here yesterday. There was no gap, no broken latch, nothing. Rule 3. Don't open the curtains. Don't stand between the window and the chair. I took 2 paces to my left without turning my head, shifting my body out of whatever line I'd been in. I kept my eyes on the bed. I kept my hands moving. The chair creaked again, and it didn't sound pleased this time. It sounded impatient. The air felt colder against the back of my neck, like the room had leaned in closer. The smell thickened, damp wood and old fabric and something faintly metallic under it, like pennies in a wet palm. My phone timer buzzed once in my pocket, a warning I was halfway through, and the vibration felt like a shout. The chair made a soft scrape, just a short drag, wood on carpet, like it adjusted its position by an inch. Every muscle in my neck tried to turn. "I'm just cleaning," I repeated. I moved to the desk and wiped it in tight strokes, fast and hard, making the rag squeak on the laminate. I didn't let my eyes lift. I didn't let them catch the mirror. I didn't let them catch the chair's outline. The chair creaked again, and this one sounded like it was right behind me. Not across the room, not in the corner. Right behind me. My breath caught, and my hands went numb for a second. Then the room went silent. It hit harder than yesterday. Yesterday, the silence had dropped near the end of the task, like a final warning. Today, it fell like a trap door. The heater sound cut. The faint hiss through the vent vanished. Even the outside wind noise that sometimes leaked through the walls just stopped, as if the motel itself had shut its ears. My phone timer hadn't buzzed a second time yet. I wasn't at 8 minutes, but the rule didn't say finish the 8 minutes no matter what. It said if the room goes silent, leave immediately. I didn't argue with it. I stepped backward toward the door, keeping my gaze low, keeping my shoulders square, refusing to give the corner a direct look. I reached for the handle with my gloved hand and pulled the door open. The hallway air hit my face like relief. Not warm, Just normal cold. A cold that belonged outside the room. I stepped out and shut the door fast, then pressed my palm flat to the wood like I could feel something on the other side. The silence inside the room lasted one more heartbeat. Then, from behind the door, I heard the softest creak, almost a sigh, like it was disappointed I'd left early. My hands shook when I retaped the frame. The marker tip dragged slightly as I drew the X marks, and I forced myself to make them clean anyway. I didn't want to give it an excuse to move them again. When I got back to the lobby, my legs felt weak. My stomach was sour. My whole body wanted to fold into the nearest chair like a surrender. Rena stood by the utility door, watching my face. I didn't need to tell her what happened. She could see it in my eyes, and the way I kept standing like sitting would kill me. I wrote the log entry with a shaking hand and kept it short. Seal changed, entered room 5, left early due to silence. I didn't add theories, I didn't add feelings, just facts. Facts were safer. For now. Night 3 didn't start with fear. It started with anger. The kind of anger you get when you haven't slept and you've spent 2 days doing everything right and it still feels like you're being played. My muscles hurt. My head ached behind my eyes. My hands were raw from cold air and cheap soap. I'd followed the schedule down to the minute, and the motel kept leaning into me anyway, like my effort was part of what it wanted. I tried to keep the evening normal. I wrote the log entry. I checked the doors. I refilled my water bottle at the sink. I walked the lobby in slow circles to keep my legs from locking up. The wood fleck was still in the logbook. The pages were starting to curl slightly at the edges from the dry heat. That tiny splinter looked like nothing, and it felt like proof of everything. Outside, the sky went from gray to black with almost no sunset in between. The wind picked up after dark and began hitting the building in steady pushes, like it wanted in. Every time it did, the sign out front buzzed and skipped. The lobby lights held, but the corners felt darker, like the light didn't reach them anymore. I kept catching myself staring at chairs, not because they looked dangerous, because they looked like relief. That was the worst part of Rule 4. It didn't just take away comfort, it made comfort feel like a trap. By 10 p.m., my back pain had sharpened into something hot along my spine. My hips ached. My knees felt too loose. I rolled my shoulders, pressed my palms into the counter, tried to stretch without turning it into a sitting posture. The chair sound showed up early tonight, faint but present, not down the hallway, not above the ceiling. It felt like it was in the vents, a creak that didn't match the wind. A drawn-out groan that came, paused, and came again, and every time it did, my skin tightened like it was reacting to a frequency my brain couldn't ignore. I stood under the duct above the breakfast nook and listened, jaw clenched. The vent grill was dusty and still. The heater wasn't even running at that moment, and still the sound arrived in slow waves. I tried to rationalize it, and the rationalizing made me more tired. Every explanation was a weight I had to carry on top of everything else. Near midnight, my eyes started doing that thing where they don't focus right. The lobby would blur for half a second and then snap back into place. I'd blink, and the camera feeds would look different, even though nothing had moved. My brain kept trying to find patterns in static images. I caught myself leaning forward toward the desk chair, just to take pressure off my back. And I stopped before my knees could bend too far, not sitting, not even close. I slid down onto the floor behind the desk again, careful with my posture, feet planted back against the wall. The cold bit into my legs immediately, but it was a clean cold compared to the feverish ache in my spine. I stayed there and watched the cameras, letting the screen glow be the only light in that corner. The hallway feed stayed empty. The front door feed showed a dark parking lot and the faint reflection of the lobby lights in the glass. The back exit feed showed nothing but a door and a strip of pale snow beyond it. Everything looked normal. My body didn't believe it. The creaking started again, faint, slow, like it was rocking in another room. I told myself it was room 5. That was the simplest answer. If I kept it contained in my head, if I kept it in that one door, halfway down the hall, maybe I could make it through the night without my brain breaking. I checked my phone. No bars, battery fine, time moving. Time was the only thing that moved the way it was supposed to. When my phone clock rolled past 2, I got up off the floor, slowly, joints stiff, and stood in front of the TV again. The remote was still taped together. The buttons were worn smooth. 2:05 a.m., 7 minutes. My eyes burned. My hands trembled a little. My stomach was empty in that dull way that doesn't feel like hunger anymore, just a lack. At 2:04 a.m., the chair sound sharpened, not louder, just clearer, like it was right on the other side of the static, waiting. When the minute flipped, I didn't hesitate. 7 minutes, I said. 2:05 a.m. I turned on the TV to static and set the volume to 12. The hiss filled the lobby, and for a split second, it felt like relief. The creaking dropped out the way it had the last 2 nights, like the sound had been cut with a blade. Then the static changed. Not the volume, not the channel, the texture. The hiss wasn't smooth anymore. It had a pulse, a slow rise and fall inside it that made my teeth ache. The snow on the screen seemed to thicken and thin in waves, and under the noise, barely there, was something like that wooden complaint, not separate from the static this time, woven into it, like the TV wasn't drowning out the chair, like it was carrying it. My skin went cold despite the heater clicking on. The hairs on my arms lifted. I kept my eyes on the clock. I didn't touch the remote. I didn't move the volume. I stood perfectly still because I didn't trust the air around me. The static pulsed again, and for a moment I thought I heard the shape of a breath in it, not a voice, not words. A slow inhale and a slower exhale stretched thin through the hiss. My mind tried to put a sentence to it anyway, and that made me angry again. I didn't need my brain inventing messages. I needed time to pass. At 2:12 a.m., I turned the TV off. The hiss died instantly. The lobby went quiet, and the creaking came back. Not distant this time. It arrived with the softest wooden groan, close enough that it felt like it was under the desk with me, rocking in the dark corner where the camera couldn't see. My shoulders tightened and my hands curled into fists. I stood there for a second, staring down the hallway, and then I heard something else. Fabric. A dry rustle, like a sleeve brushing upholstery, like someone shifting on a seat. It came from the direction of the guest wing. I took a step toward the hallway without thinking, then stopped, the rules snapping through my head like a reflex. Don't get creative. Don't sit. I didn't have a rule that told me what to do about hearing fabric in an empty motel. I only had instincts, and my instincts were tired. I stayed behind the desk and watched the hallway camera feed until my eyes watered. Nothing moved, no shadow, no door, just the empty corridor. But the rustle happened again, closer, like it was right around the corner. Then the motel did the thing it had done in room 5. The too quiet silence. It didn't come from the whole building this time. It came from the hallway, like the corridor itself had gone dead. The heater still ran. The sign still buzzed faintly. But the space beyond the lobby went still, soundless, as if someone had wrapped the hallway in thick cloth. My heart started beating harder, and the beat matched something else. A slow rhythm rising at the back of my neck, like a pulse that wasn't mine. I told myself to stay behind the desk. I told myself the camera was enough. I told myself this was how you lived through it. Then the rustle came a third time, sharp and deliberate, like someone had stood up. The instinct that made me turn my head was older than fear. It was the same instinct that makes you look when something moves at the edge of your vision, even when you know you shouldn't. I glanced down the hallway toward room 5 for one beat. I didn't see a monster. I didn't see a face. What I saw was enough to ruin me anyway. In the dim spill of hallway light, there was a shape near the floor, not fully in view, like something sat low and wrong just past the corner where the corridor bent. It wasn't standing, it wasn't crawling, it was seated, but the posture didn't make sense. Too low, too folded. Like joints didn't line up the way they should. Like something was trying to copy the idea of a person sitting without understanding how a person holds weight. My brain registered it in a flash and then tried to reject it. I snapped my eyes away, throat tight, breath stuck. "No," I said. My voice sounded small in the lobby. The second after I looked away, the hallway sound returned. Heater hiss, wind outside, sign buzz. Normal noise like nothing had happened. But my skin didn't believe it. My body was still locked in the moment I'd glanced, replaying that wrong posture over and over. I backed away from the front desk and sank toward the floor, careful with my knees, careful with my center of gravity. I wasn't trying to sit. I was trying to get low enough that I could breathe. Then I felt it. That sense of someone directly behind me, close enough that if I leaned back, I'd touch them. I froze, eyes wide, staring at the carpet. I didn't move. I didn't turn. "Not tonight," I said quietly. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a bargain. It was the only thing I could get out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, right behind my ear, a soft wooden creak sounded, gentle as a lullaby, and the hairs on my neck lifted like they were being stroked. "What the hell was that?" My voice came out thin. I stayed on the floor, breathing shallow, refusing to shift into anything that looked like rest. My back screamed, my legs went numb, my eyes burned, and every time my muscles tried to relax, every time my body tried to sink into a posture that could become sitting, that rhythm sparked at the back of my neck again, like a reminder, like a claim. I didn't sleep after that. I just waited for morning, standing when I had to, crouching when I couldn't, and learning the worst truth of the whole schedule. You don't have to break a rule for it to get you. Sometimes all it needs is one look. Dawn didn't bring warmth, just a weak gray light behind the pines that made the ice in the parking lot look like glass. I'd been awake so long my body felt hollowed out. My back throbbed, my eyes burned. Every time I tried to relax even a little, that slow rhythm sparked at the base of my skull like a second pulse that didn't belong to me. Howard walked in like he'd slept 8 hours and eaten breakfast, clean jacket, clean shoes, the same folder under his arm. He went straight to the front desk without looking around, like the building was nothing more than an address he had to clear off a list. He opened the logbook and scanned the pages with a dead expression. No pause, no frown, no curiosity, just a man reading lines the way you read a receipt. "Any issues?" he asked. "Seal changed once," I told him. He nodded once, small, like I'd told him the thermostat had dipped a degree overnight. He didn't ask which day. He didn't ask how far it moved. He didn't ask why I'd left early on the second afternoon. He didn't ask anything that would force him to acknowledge what that line could mean. He slid a signature sheet across the counter, then reached into his folder and pulled out a thick envelope. It landed with a soft slap that made my stomach tighten. "Here," he said. The weight of it felt real in a way nothing in that motel had. Real paper, real money, enough to fix my deadline, enough to keep my car, enough to make the last 3 nights feel like they'd happened to somebody else. I signed with a shaking hand. Howard checked the signature, tucked the paper away, and closed his folder like the transaction was finished. No congratulations, no warning, no goodbye. He turned and walked out. The lobby door shut behind him. Cold Arizona air slid into the gap like it belonged there more than anything inside that building. His sedan backed out and disappeared down the road without hesitation. I stood behind the desk holding the envelope, waiting for the motel to react to the handoff. It didn't. No creak, no rustle, no too quiet drop. Just the heater rattling and the faint buzz of the dying sign out front. That almost made me laugh. Almost. Rena came out of the utility hall like she'd been listening for Howard's car to leave. She looked at the envelope, then at my face. Her eyes didn't hold sympathy. They held recognition, like she'd seen the same look on other people and knew what came after. She walked with me to the lobby door, staying a step away from the chairs like they were contaminated. "Don't sit anymore," she said. I nodded once because I couldn't make my mouth form a question without sounding like I was begging. I didn't want to beg in front of her. I stepped outside, and the cold hit my face sharp and honest. I crossed the iced lot carefully and got into my Civic. The driver's seat felt like a trap. I lowered myself into it like I was testing thin ice, trying to keep my weight in my legs as long as I could. The moment my body settled, that rhythm sparked at the back of my neck. Not a sound, a sensation, a slow rock like old wood moving just behind my ear. My hands clamped the steering wheel until my knuckles went pale. I started the engine and pulled out without looking back. I drove until the motel was miles behind me and the trees started thinning. The day stayed gray. The heater blasted dusty air that never quite warmed my bones. I told myself it was adrenaline. I told myself it would fade once I got real sleep, once I ate real food, once I was back in a world with traffic and people and noise. An hour later, I stopped at a roadside diner off the interstate. Bright fluorescent lights, the smell of bacon and burnt coffee, a waitress moving fast with that tired efficiency people wear like armor. I ordered eggs and toast because I wanted something normal. I wanted to feel like a person again. When the plate hit the table, I slid into the plastic booth seat and felt my muscles finally try to let go. A creak sounded right by my ear. Soft, old, intimate. Not the booth, not the table, not the floor. My fork froze in my hand. My breath stopped halfway in. I turned my head fast enough to make my neck pop. There was nothing behind me but a laminated menu and a window with daylight spilling through. The waitress glanced over like I was about to start a problem. I forced my face blank and set my fork down carefully, like sudden movements might make it worse. I didn't finish my meal sitting down. I stood at the counter and ate like I was in trouble. I paid in cash and left too much tip because I wanted out without questions. Back in the car, every red light felt like an endurance test. My body wanted to slump into the seat. The moment it tried, that rhythm flared behind my neck, reminding me that sitting wasn't neutral anymore. Not in the car. Not anywhere. By early afternoon, I made my payment. I hit the deadline. I kept my car. I should have felt relief. I did for about 5 minutes, right up until I understood relief is a posture. Relaxing is what you do when you believe you're safe. My body didn't believe it. Over the next week, I learned how small a life can get when one basic thing is taken away. I stopped sitting in waiting rooms. If I had to go somewhere with chairs, I stood against the wall like I was waiting to be called into court. I took all my food to go. I avoided movie theaters. I avoided friends' couches. I slept flat or on my side and never propped myself up. I learned to move from standing to lying down without passing through that in-between posture that looks like waiting. Because the second I looked like I was waiting, I felt it. That slow rock at the base of my skull, like something had taken a seat just behind me and started moving in time with my heartbeat. I never looked up that motel. I never drove back to Flagstaff. I don't want pictures. I don't want confirmation. I don't want new angles for my brain to replay. I also never took another listing that sounded like that one. Cash. Start immediately. Closed property. Easy money. Those words used to mean opportunity. Now they sound like a trap with a timer. Sometimes the price isn't your life. Sometimes it's smaller than that. Sometimes it's the ability to sit down and feel safe. And once you've given the wrong thing a single look, it doesn't need the room anymore. It just needs you.